Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it walks softly down a hallway at night, believing no one is awake. I discovered my marriage was a lie the night I realized my wife had been visiting my adult stepson's room after midnight, every night, with a silence that felt practiced, deliberate, and deeply wrong. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout. I didn't even move. Because in that moment, I understood something far more dangerous than anger. I understood intent. For weeks, maybe months, something had been happening behind my back. Not a mistake. Not confusion. A routine. And routines don't form without choice. They form when someone believes they are untouchable. That night, as I lay still and listened to the floorboards creak in a rhythm I now recognized, I knew one truth with absolute clarity. The people closest to you don't destroy you with force. They destroy you with secrecy. I had trusted both of them. I had given them shelter. I had built a home that was supposed to mean safety. And they turned it into a quiet crime scene where the weapon was silence and the motive was arrogance. I didn't need proof yet. I needed patience. Because when betrayal thinks it's hidden, it becomes careless. And carelessness always leaves evidence. I was not a weak man. But I was a calm one. And calm men survive things angry men never see coming. The next morning, my wife kissed my cheek like always. Same pressure. Same smile. Same lie. She poured coffee. Asked about my day. Mentioned nothing about the hours she spent awake when she thought I was asleep. My stepson avoided my eyes. Not dramatically. Just enough. His shoulders stiffened when I entered a room. He answered politely. Too politely. Like someone rehearsing innocence. That was when I understood the depth of it. Guilt doesn't panic. It performs. And both of them were performing very well. I spent my life believing that truth eventually rises on its own. I was wrong. Truth doesn't rise. It has to be invited out, carefully. So I created an invitation. I installed a hidden camera outside his room. Not inside. Not invasive. Just enough to see patterns. Movement. Time. Behavior. I wasn't hunting scandal. I was confirming betrayal. Because there is a difference between suspicion and certainty. And certainty changes a man. The first night I checked the footage, my hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I expected rage. I expected disbelief. I expected my heart to collapse. Instead, I felt something colder. Sharper. Clarity. There she was. Barefoot. Slow. Familiar. Moving through the dark like it belonged to her. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around. She didn't check if I was watching, because she believed I never would. And when his door opened from the inside, without surprise, without confusion, without words, I knew this wasn't a moment. It was an arrangement. That was the instant my marriage ended. Not with shouting. Not with tears. But with understanding. And understanding is far more permanent. I stopped seeing my wife as a partner. I stopped seeing my stepson as family. I started seeing them as two people who underestimated silence. And silence, when used correctly, is devastating. From that night on, everything changed, except my behavior. I laughed when expected. I listened when spoken to. I slept beside a woman who believed she was invisible. That is the most dangerous illusion a betrayer can have. Because when they think they're unseen, they stop protecting themselves. I began documenting everything. Dates. Times. Patterns. Excuses. Not for revenge fueled by anger. For justice designed with precision. You see, loud revenge satisfies the ego. But quiet revenge rewrites lives. And I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in exposure at the exact moment it would hurt the most. Morally, socially, and permanently. They thought I was old-fashioned. Predictable. Too trusting. They forgot something important. I built my life slowly. I lost things before. I learned patience the hard way. And patience, when paired with truth, becomes strategy. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. But that was temporary. Because the person who understands the truth always regains control. The people living in lies never see the ground disappearing beneath them. By the end of that first week, I had stopped asking why. Why is a question for the wounded. I was already healing. I was asking how. How do you let people destroy themselves without lifting a finger? How do you step aside and allow truth to do the work? How do you win without becoming cruel? I knew the answer. You don't confront betrayal. You outlast it. And as I watched them move through the house, confident and careless, I made a quiet promise to myself. They would walk freely right up to the moment the truth closed the door behind them, and there would be no handle on the other side. This was not the story of rage. This was the story of restraint. And restraint, when mastered, is the most powerful revenge there is. Before the nights changed, before silence became suspicious, before trust turned into something fragile, my life was ordinary in the way men like me appreciate most. Stable. Predictable. Earned. I lived in a quiet American suburb where lawns were trimmed on Saturdays and neighbors waved without curiosity. The kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Where betrayal felt unlikely simply because routines felt solid. I had built that life carefully. Not quickly. Not recklessly. Brick by brick. Year by year. I was not a rich man. But I was a reliable one. I worked in logistics management for a mid-sized manufacturing firm. Nothing glamorous. Just systems, deadlines, accountability. I had learned early that chaos thrives where responsibility is vague, so I made my living doing the opposite. I showed up early. I kept records. I noticed patterns. That habit, noticing patterns, would later save me. But at the time, it just made me good at my job. My marriage came later in life. After disappointment. After learning what loneliness actually feels like. When I met my wife, she seemed calm in a way that felt familiar. Not exciting. Not dramatic. Just steady. She laughed easily but never loudly. She listened without interrupting. She spoke about responsibility as if it mattered. That matters to men like me. We didn't fall into love. We stepped into it carefully. She already had a son, my stepson, from a previous marriage. He was in his early 20s when we married. Intelligent. Quiet. Guarded. A young man shaped by a father who had left early and a mother who had learned to compensate by holding too tightly. I respected the distance between us. I didn't try to replace anyone. I didn't demand affection. I believed respect grows best when left alone. When he moved back in with us temporarily, just until he figures things out, I agreed without hesitation. That was my mistake. Not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness, when unguarded, invites entitlement. At first, things were normal. We shared dinners, exchanged polite conversation, occupied separate worlds under one roof. He stayed up late. I woke early. Our paths crossed briefly, without friction, and my wife seemed relieved. At the time, I misread that relief as maternal comfort. I would later understand it differently. Our house had rules, simple ones. Privacy respected, doors knocked, schedules understood. I believed boundaries prevented misunderstandings. I was wrong. Boundaries only work when everyone agrees they matter. Looking back now, the signs were subtle but consistent. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The way laughter sounded delayed, as if it needed permission. The way my wife grew defensive over small, unnecessary things. Why are you asking? Can't people just live? You're overthinking. Those phrases appeared quietly, then often. And whenever a phrase appears often enough, it's no longer defensive, it's rehearsed. I was not suspicious yet. Just attentive. Because suspicion accuses. Attention observes. And observation, when left uninterrupted, reveals truth on its own. My wife began rearranging her schedule. Late showers. Lingering nights. Frequent, can't sleep, explanations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. That's how deception survives, by being unremarkable. I remember one evening clearly. We were sitting in the living room. Television on. Volume low. She was scrolling on her phone. My stepson passed through the room without acknowledgement. She watched him leave. Not openly. Not obviously. But with an awareness that lingered just half a second too long. That was when something inside me shifted. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The same recognition I had felt years ago when a business partner slowly redirected funds, not enough to notice immediately, but enough to indicate intent. Patterns always announce themselves softly first. Still, I said nothing. Because calm men don't rush to conclusions. They wait. Our marriage, from the outside, looked intact. We hosted neighbors, attended gatherings, smiled for photos. But intimacy had changed. She became distant without explanation, present without warmth. She slept beside me like someone sharing space, not life. And yet, she was energetic elsewhere. I noticed that too. My stepson grew bolder. Not rude. Just less cautious. He stopped avoiding shared spaces. Left his door unlocked. Moved through the house as if ownership was shared. Confidence without achievement is always borrowed. Borrowed from someone else's protection. One night, weeks before the truth revealed itself fully, I woke briefly around midnight. I heard movement. Soft footsteps. Barely audible. I assumed it was the house settling. I went back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. Same time. Same rhythm. And the third night. By the fourth, I wasn't asleep anymore. Men like me don't ignore instincts. We delay conclusions, not instincts. So I started waking earlier, listening longer. And that's when routine became unmistakable. She left our bed quietly, returned quietly, never mentioned it. And silence, repeated often enough, becomes confession. Still, I did not confront her. Because confrontation alerts deception. And I wanted deception comfortable. I wanted it careless. This wasn't about catching someone. It was about understanding how deep the rot went. Because shallow betrayal can be repaired. Deep betrayal requires distance, not discussion. The house that once felt stable now felt staged. Like a set built for performance. And I was the only one not acting. By the end of that month, I understood one crucial truth. I was not living with people who felt guilty. I was living with people who felt safe. And safety, when undeserved, breeds arrogance. That was the environment in which my patience hardened. That was the calm before exposure. That was the setup, not of revenge, but of inevitability. Once I accepted that something fundamental had changed in my home, I stopped participating emotionally and started observing structurally. This is something age teaches you. Young men feel first and think later. Older men reverse the order. I didn't withdraw out of bitterness. I withdrew to see clearly. And clarity requires distance. I began adjusting my routines without announcing them. I stayed longer at work. I woke earlier. I stopped asking questions that invited lies. When someone expects confrontation and receives calm instead, they become confused. And confused people reveal more than defensive ones. My wife noticed the shift. Not consciously at first. She asked if I was tired, if work was stressful, if something was wrong. I answered simply, no, just busy, all good. Those answers unsettled her more than anger ever could have. Because anger gives people something to fight. Calm gives them nothing. Our conversations became logistical. Groceries, bills, schedules, no intimacy, no curiosity. She didn't complain. That told me everything. The house, meanwhile, began to feel different. Not louder. Not messier. Looser. Rules softened. Boundaries blurred. My stepson started using shared spaces late at night, cooking meals at midnight, playing music softly, but confidently, leaving doors half open, staying comfortable where caution used to live. Comfort, when unearned, is always borrowed, and borrowed confidence has a source. I watched how she interacted with him. Never openly inappropriate, never overtly close, but attentive. She noticed his moods instantly, adjusted her tone around him, defended him unnecessarily. If I questioned something small, a bill, a noise, a mess, she responded quickly, protectively. He's just figuring things out. Don't be so strict. He's had it hard. That last line stayed with me, not because it was untrue, but because it was selective. Everyone has had it hard. Yet she only extended that compassion in one direction. I stopped offering opinions. When you stop speaking, people fill the silence for you. And what they say reveals what they believe. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The television was on, volume low. The kitchen light was off. I stood in the hallway longer than necessary, listening. I heard laughter. Muted, contained, shared, coming from his room. Not loud enough to be accidental. I didn't approach. I didn't interrupt. I noted the time and walked away. That's the difference between suspicion and confirmation. Suspicion reacts. Confirmation records. At dinner that night, neither of them mentioned the afternoon. They didn't need to. Their silence was synchronized. And synchronized silence is agreement. I started sleeping lighter. Not out of anxiety. Out of awareness. When you realize your environment is compromised, you don't panic. You monitor. There was a moment, weeks into this quiet unraveling, when my wife looked at me differently. Not with love. Not with guilt. With assessment. As if she were measuring whether I was still relevant. Still in control. Still a factor. That look told me something crucial. She had already rewritten the story in her mind. And in her version, I was outdated. People don't betray others until they first betray the truth about who helped them. She had decided I was no longer necessary. And once someone decides that, morality becomes flexible. My stepson began pushing limits subtly, asking for money without explanation. Using my tools without asking. Leaving his things in shared spaces. Small acts of dominance disguised as carelessness. He was marking territory. And he felt protected. One afternoon, while my wife was out, I walked past his room. The door was closed. That was new. It had always been open before. Closed doors change the energy of a house. They suggest secrecy instead of privacy. I didn't open it. I didn't touch the handle. I didn't need to. Something had shifted. I realized then that this wasn't about attraction. It was about control. My wife had lost it once, in her first marriage. And now she was reclaiming it the wrong way. Through secrecy. Through alliance. Through exclusion. By choosing someone inside the house against the house itself. That's when I understood the danger. Not emotional betrayal. Structural betrayal. The kind that destabilizes everything quietly before anyone notices. I began protecting myself. Financially. Legally. Emotionally. I reviewed accounts. Updated documents. Secured records. Not because I planned revenge. Because responsibility demands preparedness. And I refused to be caught unguarded. She noticed my focus. Asked what I was working on. Just organizing things, I said. Which was true. She smiled, relieved. She thought organization meant distraction. She didn't realize it meant defense. One night, she didn't return to bed until nearly morning. She offered no explanation. And I didn't ask. That was the night she stopped pretending. And the night I stopped hoping. Hope is the first casualty of betrayal. But clarity replaces it. And clarity is stronger. By now, the house no longer felt shared. It felt divided. Two worlds overlapping without acknowledgement. And I stood between them, unseen. The most painful part wasn't jealousy. It was displacement. The realization that the life I had built was being slowly reassigned without my consent. And reassignment without discussion is theft. Still, I remained calm. Because panic would only speed things up. And I wasn't ready for the end. Not yet. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them confident. I wanted them careless. Because careless people reveal themselves completely. By the time I decided to confirm what I already knew, the decision felt less emotional and more procedural. Like filing a report. Like closing a case. I wasn't searching for truth. I was documenting it. That was the mindset that carried me into the final stage of understanding. The stage where patience becomes preparation. By the time I reached the final stage of understanding, I was no longer emotionally inside the situation. That distance saved me. When pain is fresh, men react. When pain settles, men decide. And I had decided one thing clearly. I would not lose my dignity trying to save something already corrupted. The house had fully changed its rhythm. Meals were no longer shared consistently. Schedules overlapped only by accident. Conversations felt curated. Not dishonest. Managed. And management always hides intent. My wife had become comfortable in a way that only comes when someone believes the worst is already behind them. She dressed differently at home. Moved freely at night. Stopped asking permission for anything. People who feel guilty seek reassurance. People who feel powerful seek nothing. That difference mattered. My stepson, meanwhile, no longer hid his presence. He lingered. Not in obvious ways. In confident ones. Longer showers. Extended late-night activity. Ownership of shared silence. He had stopped behaving like a guest. Guests remain cautious. He behaved like someone who believed the house was already his. That illusion is dangerous. Because illusions collapse violently when confronted by reality. I remember a quiet afternoon when the three of us sat in the same room without speaking. Television on. Phones out. Silence thick. I watched them through the reflection in the dark screen. They weren't looking at each other. They didn't need to. Their awareness moved in sync. That is what alignment looks like. And alignment against someone else is betrayal at its purest form. I stood up and left the room without a word. Neither of them reacted. They didn't even look up. That moment hurt more than anything else. Not because I felt excluded, but because I felt erased. Erasure is worse than anger. Anger acknowledges presence. Erasure denies it. That night, as I lay awake, I accepted something difficult but necessary. This wasn't going to end with apologies. It would end with consequences. And consequences require proof. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone. I was trying to restore balance. Because imbalance is what allowed this to happen. Power without accountability always corrupts. I revisited every interaction of the past months. The dismissals. The defensiveness. The rehearsed explanations. They weren't isolated moments. They were a pattern. And patterns don't form accidentally. They form when people believe they are justified. That belief was their weakness. Because people who feel justified stop hiding. I placed the camera carefully. Not inside the room. Not violating privacy. Just positioned to record what could not be denied. Movement. Timing. Frequency. Truth without commentary. The act itself felt procedural. No rush. No drama. Just execution. Because by then, my heart was no longer involved. Only my principles were. As I tested the angle and reviewed the feed, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I wanted confirmation, but because uncertainty had ended. And uncertainty is torture. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Because whatever happened next would be based on reality, not fear. In the days that followed, I behaved exactly as before. Predictable, reliable, unchanged. This consistency made them comfortable. And comfort makes people careless. I stopped watching immediately. I let patterns form. Because a single moment can be denied. A routine cannot. My wife grew lighter, more relaxed, less cautious. She laughed more openly. Not with me, but in general. That told me she felt safe. My stepson stopped pretending to be uncertain about his future. He spoke about plans with confidence. Assumed resources were available. Assumed support was guaranteed. He was already living in the outcome he expected. They believed they had won. And belief precedes exposure. There is a dangerous phase in betrayal. The phase where the betrayer stops fearing discovery. That is the phase I was waiting for. By the time I reviewed the footage fully, I didn't feel shock. I felt confirmation. The kind that settles into the chest without resistance. Not explosive. Definitive. I closed the file and turned off the monitor. Not because I couldn't watch, but because I didn't need to anymore. The story was complete. The timeline clear. The intent undeniable. That was the moment everything became inevitable. Because once truth is known fully, the future stops being flexible. I didn't rush. I didn't plan confrontation. I planned positioning. Where I would stand. What I would say. What I would not say. Silence would do most of the work. I began thinking beyond the house. Beyond the marriage. Beyond emotion. I thought in terms of outcome. And outcomes favor those who remain calm the longest. The setup was complete. Not just in circumstance. In mindset. I was no longer a man discovering betrayal. I was a man deciding how truth would be revealed. And that distinction matters. Because victims react. Strategists wait. I waited. And while I waited, they grew bolder. Which was exactly what I needed. Once certainty settled inside me, the house became something else entirely. Not hostile. Not explosive. Transactional. I was no longer living inside a marriage. I was living beside a quiet alliance. And alliances, once formed, begin testing power. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It was dismissive. My wife stopped consulting me on decisions that affected the household. Repairs were scheduled without mention. Money moved without explanation. Plans were made as statements, not conversations. I already handled it, she would say. Not defensively, casually. Casual authority is the clearest sign of control. My stepson mirrored her behavior. He spoke through her, not to me. Requests were routed. Information filtered. I was becoming an observer in my own home. And they were no longer subtle about it. At dinner one night, I commented on a charge on our account. Nothing accusatory. Just curiosity. She didn't answer. He did. It's fine. I needed it. Not asking. Declaring. I looked at him calmly. Then at her. She said nothing. Silence, again, aligned. That was the moment I realized the conflict had entered a new phase. They weren't hiding anymore. They were reassigning authority. I nodded. That's fine, I said, and returned to my meal. That response unsettled them more than objection ever could have. Because objection acknowledges hierarchy. Acceptance suggests withdrawal. And withdrawal shifts balance unexpectedly. The subtle humiliations began soon after. Not insults. Exclusions. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Plans were discussed openly without involving me. Decisions were announced, not shared. I was being reduced socially before being removed structurally. This is how people prepare themselves emotionally for betrayal. They make the other person smaller first. I felt the change externally. Neighbors spoke differently. Friends interacted carefully. Stories had been told, not lies. reframings. I was now the rigid one, the distant one, the obstacle. That's how betrayal protects itself, by controlling narrative. My wife began questioning my contributions. Not openly, indirectly. She'd mention how things were easier now, how everyone was more relaxed, how conflict had disappeared. Conflict hadn't disappeared. It had been redirected toward me. My stepson stopped hiding his contempt. It wasn't loud. It was dismissive. Eye contact held just a moment too long. Responses delayed deliberately. Corrections offered where none were needed. He believed he was untouchable. And people who feel untouchable always overreach. I let him. Because arrogance accelerates collapse. One afternoon, I returned home unexpectedly early. The house was alive. Music playing. Voices raised in laughter. I stepped inside quietly. They didn't notice. I stood in the hallway, listening. They were discussing plans. Future plans. Plans that did not include me. Living arrangements. Finances. Timelines. As if my presence was temporary. As if my consent was irrelevant. I walked in. The conversation stopped instantly. My wife smiled. Too quickly. "Oh, you're home early." "Yes," I said. "I am." No one resumed the conversation. It didn't need to continue. I had already heard enough. That night, something shifted internally. Not anger. Resolve. Because humiliation clarifies priorities. And my priority was no longer preserving peace. It was preserving truth. The conflict intensified gradually. Not through shouting. Through displacement. My opinions stopped being asked. My presence stopped being acknowledged. My role stopped being recognized. This wasn't emotional neglect. It was strategic erasure. I began receiving subtle challenges. Small tests. Requests designed to provoke reaction. Late-night noise. Disrespectful interruptions. Dismissive remarks framed as jokes. I ignored them all. Not because I was weak, but because I was collecting data. There's a point in conflict where restraint becomes visible. They noticed. They mistook it for surrender. That misinterpretation sealed their fate. My wife became openly critical. Not of me directly. Of my ways. My routines. My values. My caution. She framed my patience as stagnation. "People grow," she said once, loudly enough for him to hear. "Some people," he added, "don't." They laughed. I didn't react. That moment stayed with them longer than any argument would have. Because silence after insult creates uncertainty. The house no longer felt tense. It felt occupied. Occupied by people who believed the territory had already changed hands. One evening, my stepson moved my things. Not maliciously. Purposefully. He rearranged shared spaces to suit his comfort. When I noticed, he shrugged. I figured it made more sense. That sentence revealed everything. Sense to whom? I said nothing. I adjusted. Because adjustment is not agreement. It's preparation. By now, the conflict was no longer private. It was social. I was being portrayed as distant, unengaged, outdated. They needed others to see me that way. Because public justification reduces private guilt. I attended gatherings where conversations paused when I joined. I received polite smiles, concerned looks. People had been primed. And priming only happens when someone fears exposure. Still, I waited. Because the more public the confidence, the more devastating the fall. The rising conflict wasn't loud. It was layered. Everyday disrespect stacked quietly until it formed a structure. And structures collapse suddenly, not gradually. That was the stage we were in. The stage where betrayal believes it has stabilized. The stage right before truth interrupts everything. Betrayal thrives in daylight when it believes the night protects it. By now, the subtle shifts had become routine. My wife moved freely through the house as if she owned it. My stepson lingered in shared spaces with unearned confidence. The unspoken understanding between them had hardened into a quiet alliance. And I watched. One morning, I noticed something different. Breakfast was laid out without me being asked for input. Milk, eggs, coffee, and toast, arranged exactly how he preferred. Nothing wrong in itself, but the act symbolized control. Control is always revealed in small decisions first. My wife smiled when she handed him his plate. A smile I had never seen directed at me. Polite, calm, calculated. She had stopped pretending. Her attention, which had once been distributed equally, now flowed entirely toward him. And he noticed it. Confidence deepened. Arrogance began to form. Later that day, he asked me for a favor. A minor thing, financial assistance for a class he hadn't mentioned. I listened. I could see the expectation in his eyes. Not request. Expectation. I said nothing immediately. He waited. My silence weighed on him more than refusal ever could have. Finally, I responded. We'll see. Nothing more. He left, frustrated, but calm on the outside. Inside, he realized I wasn't moving the way he expected. That's when the first real cracks appeared. The house's atmosphere grew heavier. Subtle tests came almost daily. Doors left open when privacy was expected. Personal items moved, accidentally. Questions asked in front of others to provoke embarrassment. I noted every action, every pattern. Every attempt to provoke me only revealed their boldness. And boldness makes mistakes. One evening, my wife brought friends over without consulting me. A small gathering. Casual. Nothing extraordinary. Except they all interacted with my stepson as if he were the head of the household. I realized then the extent of the shift. Not only had my authority been challenged privately, it was being undermined publicly. And public undermining is far more dangerous than private betrayal. That night, after the guests left, I remained silent while they discussed how smoothly the evening had gone. She really handles things well now, one friend said. Yes, my stepson replied, proud. Everything's easier without complications. Their laughter did not include me. I felt nothing. Not shock. Not anger. I felt strategy forming. The next morning, small acts of defiance escalated. I found my office rearranged. Papers moved. Files misplaced. Calendars altered. All seemingly harmless. But cumulative disorder signals power. They were asserting dominance. And dominance is always temporary. I began documenting every movement, every decision, every subtle slight. Not for confrontation. Not for immediate revenge. For certainty. Because certainty is the foundation of control. I observed my wife and stepson together. I noticed their timing, their alignment, their subtle gestures. She deferred to him in ways she never had before. He spoke in tones she used to reserve for me. Their alliance had become unmistakable. One afternoon, my stepson openly ignored me while making a decision about household repairs. "I'll take care of it," he said. I looked at him calmly. "Very well," I replied. No anger. No assertion. He froze for a moment, unsure how to interpret the calm. And that moment, brief though it was, unsettled him more than confrontation ever could have. The rising conflict became social, structural, and psychological. They tested boundaries constantly. They celebrated their perceived victory silently. And I waited. At work, I found myself distracted, thinking about them, their patterns, their boldness. I realized that conflict doesn't only exist in the house. It follows you. It grows. It seeps into daily life. And yet, it also teaches patience. By now, they no longer hesitated around me. They believed they were untouchable. And the truly dangerous part of betrayal is that those who feel untouchable never prepare for the consequences. One night, my wife commented casually, Things feel so much easier now, don't they? Not looking at me. Looking at him. I smiled quietly. Yes, I said softly. Much easier. And I meant it. Because in calm, there is preparation. And preparation is the deadliest kind of patience. From that point, they began openly testing me. Leaving notes in places I would see. Asking for favors I hadn't promised. Expecting decisions to bend to them. Each act was calculated. Each act confirmed my observation. Their arrogance had peaked. I did nothing outwardly. But internally, I catalogued. Time. Date. Pattern. Behavior. Every rising conflict became a data point. Every small slight became evidence. The tension inside the house became almost tangible. I could feel it in the air, in the way they moved, in their unspoken conversations. They believed they were safe. And safety is always an illusion. By now, subtle humiliations were a daily ritual. I was being treated as irrelevant without ever being told. Their arrogance grew because I allowed it to. And allowing it is the first step in turning arrogance into exposure. The house became a chessboard. They moved pieces confidently, unaware that every move was noted, remembered, and catalogued. I didn't react. I didn't intervene. Because every arrogant move brings the betrayer closer to collapse. That is the essence of rising conflict. Not loud explosions. Not dramatic arguments. But calculated, everyday arrogance tested against silent, methodical observation. And I was the silent observer, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike without striking at all. By this point, their confidence had transformed into recklessness. My wife no longer measured her actions. My stepson no longer hesitated. Doors left open. Conversations spoken aloud. Boundaries completely ignored. They believed they had mastered the environment. They believed I would never intervene. And that belief was their weakness. One evening, I returned home earlier than usual. The house was alive with activity. Music playing. Laughter carried in perfect sync. They were unaware of my presence. I stood in the doorway. Just watched. And they revealed everything. They moved openly, unconsciously asserting ownership. Planning future vacations without my input. Rearranging spaces to suit their comfort. Discussing finances as if I no longer existed. Every detail of their alliance was now visible. Confidence had become arrogance. Arrogance had become exposure. At dinner, my stepson spoke over me. I think it makes more sense this way, he said, not asking. I didn't respond. He expected confrontation. I gave calm. That hesitation, that patience, unsettled him. He glanced at my wife. She smiled faintly. A shared acknowledgement that they believed they were untouchable. And that belief was fatal. The subtle humiliations intensified. Small personal items misplaced deliberately. Notes left where they'd be seen but not questioned. Explanations framed as jokes meant to provoke. I did not react. I catalogued, observed, and waited. Every reckless act was recorded. Every breach of decorum noted. Because the bigger the arrogance, the louder the collapse. One weekend, they decided to host a gathering. Friends, neighbors, casual acquaintances. They moved as a unit, confident, aligned, fearless. They even discussed my supposed absence as if I were invisible. I smiled inwardly. Arrogance and carelessness rarely survive exposure. That night, I reviewed the footage. Every movement, every glance, every whispered word. Their alliance was complete. Their recklessness undeniable. Their moral compass absent. And all of it had been documented. By now, even the house itself seemed to conspire with me. Patterns, movements, mistakes, all repeated like clockwork. They had become predictable because they felt untouchable. And predictability is a weapon when paired with patience. I allowed them to continue their confident performance. I laughed when expected. I spoke when necessary. I slept beside a woman who thought she was untouchable. And the stepson grew bolder each day, inviting friends over without notice, making decisions about property and finances, assuming I would not notice, would not care. One morning, I caught them mid-discussion about a future plan that excluded me completely. They didn't realize I was watching from the hallway. I said nothing. The silence carried more weight than any accusation could have. Arrogance requires acknowledgement to survive. I withheld it. The house had become a theater. They believed they were leading the story. But all the while, I was documenting every act, every movement, every assumption of control. By the end of this phase, the rising conflict had reached its peak. Confidence had become recklessness. Secret alliances had become public displays. Arrogance had become exposure. The stage was set. And now, all that remained was the precise moment of revelation. By the time I had full confirmation of their alliance, their recklessness had reached a level that could not sustain itself. My wife and stepson were now entirely predictable. Not by habit, by confidence. They believed their actions were invisible. And that belief allowed me to act. The first action was subtle. I made adjustments to my routines, almost imperceptible. Earlier arrivals. Later departures. Spending weekends quietly away under plausible reasons. Every movement calculated to create absence while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Absence builds tension when people assume you are passive, unaware, or irrelevant. I began to restructure their perceived safety. I didn't confront. I didn't threaten. I didn't show a single reaction. Instead, I let them operate under the assumption that nothing would ever change. Confidence without challenge invites overreach. And overreach is self-destructive. The hidden camera I had placed became my silent partner. Not to spy unnecessarily, but to document patterns, times, frequencies, behavior, alignment. I watched them move through the house freely, believing nothing could touch them. That freedom revealed everything. One evening, they were careless enough to leave their discussions audible near the hallways. Every word they said hinted at entitlement, collusion, and assumption. They discussed how I hadn't noticed anything, and how things were finally smooth now. They laughed, oblivious that their arrogance was being captured. Oblivion is fatal in calculated revenge. I began my strategy quietly. Not confrontation. Not punishment. Not public exposure. Control through inevitability. Every preparation I had made, documenting finances, collecting evidence, monitoring behavior, now coalesced into a single plan. Let them act freely. Let them believe they were untouchable. Then, when the moment was right, remove the illusion. The turning point required precision timing. Too soon, and the evidence wouldn't be conclusive. Too late, and their arrogance might become permanent. So I waited. Days became weeks. Weeks became a month. And every day, they overstepped. I noticed small signs first. The way my stepson started staying out later, assuming no consequences. The way my wife's attention shifted entirely to him, leaving the house in chaos. The way they began leaving the camera's sight without knowing it, exposing more behavior than I expected. Every small act gave me more clarity. One morning, I tested their confidence. I deliberately forgot to attend a small meeting in the neighborhood. They had assumed I was always present, always engaged, always monitoring. When I didn't show, the stepson took the initiative to host everyone himself. He didn't think to consult me. He didn't hesitate. And in that hesitation-less action, arrogance became reckless. That afternoon, I went through my evidence carefully. The pattern was undeniable. The intention was clear. The betrayal was systematic, deliberate, and total. And at that point, the emotional shift inside me was complete. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt certainty. Next, I began planning a controlled exposure. I didn't want to shout. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted inevitability. I imagined the exact sequence. The stepson believes he is untouchable. My wife assumes I am passive. I reveal the patterns and truth precisely when their arrogance is at its peak. There is no denial, no excuse, only clarity. Preparation is more powerful than confrontation. In the following days, I began testing their assumptions. I left documents in plain sight. I allowed discussions to happen openly, knowing I had recorded everything. I let minor conflicts escalate to small humiliations, creating the impression that they were untouchable. And they believed it. One evening, my wife asked me to handle a task. It was minor, almost trivial. I smiled and said, "I think it's already handled." She glanced at me, confused. Her confusion was deliciously subtle, because it hinted at a fracture she hadn't anticipated. Confidence falters when it meets uncertainty. Meanwhile, the stepson made a critical mistake. He openly took a decision about money, assuming my silence meant consent. He did not consider my patience as a measure, not surrender. That mistake would be key. I continued observing, recording, and cataloging. I never interfered. I never accused. I allowed arrogance to create its own collapse. Because in calm revenge, the guilty are architects of their own downfall. I noticed the smallest cracks forming. The stepson started questioning decisions. My wife hesitated slightly in conversations. Little pauses. Micro-expressions. Tiny signs that certainty was being undermined. And all of it was silent. Silent, because confrontation would have ruined the psychological advantage. Then, one night, I enacted the next layer of the turning point. I altered my own schedule slightly, moved furniture subtly, adjusted routines they had assumed were permanent. It was imperceptible to an untrained observer, but it sent the message: control was not theirs. The first realization began to dawn. The true turning point came in a perfect alignment of evidence and behavior. The stepson made an arrogant statement in front of a neighbor. "My father doesn't understand. It's easier this way." He laughed, confident, unaware of the timing. And that timing was everything. I quietly recorded the interaction, knowing it would later validate every pattern I had documented. Evidence, patience, and timing. That's the trinity of effective, calm revenge. And now, every piece was falling into place. The key principle revealed itself clearly. Patience allows arrogance to peak. Observation ensures every move is documented. Silence creates the illusion of impotence. And when all three are combined, the turning point becomes inevitable. Over the following week, small victories emerged. The stepson stumbled socially. A friend commented on his overconfidence. My wife misinterpreted a casual remark, showing guilt in micro-expressions. I noted it all. Every small shift was a signal that inevitability was approaching. By now, I was no longer emotionally invested in their reactions. I was invested in justice through clarity. The turning point is not chaos. It is control. It is allowing the guilty to construct their own collapse while remaining calm and deliberate. I began preparing the final steps. Not dramatic confrontations. Not angry accusations. Strategic positioning. When the time came, I would let truth speak louder than any words. At this stage, my patience had created pressure. Pressure that is invisible. Pressure that manifests in subtle uncertainty. Pressure that arrogance cannot withstand. And that is where the turning point rests. The guilty feel invincible. Their decisions are reckless. Their alignment blinds them to evidence. And all the while, the observer is calm, precise, and ready. The house itself became a tool. Each misstep recorded. Every open door catalogued. Every verbal slip captured. They were walking into their own exposure. The final element of the turning point was timing in action and social leverage. I planned one event, a family gathering, knowing they would behave as usual. I arranged for every recording to be ready. Every sequence timed. Every pattern obvious. And at that gathering, arrogance would meet clarity. They were so confident that they didn't notice my calm. I smiled. I participated in conversation. I seemed neutral. And that calm unsettled them more than confrontation ever could. Because it suggested awareness without reaction. I allowed a week to pass. The stepson made further errors. My wife misjudged situations. Both were overexposed to the sequences I had documented. Every day, the turning point grew closer. Every misstep stacked. The moment was nearly ready. I didn't rush. I waited for peak arrogance and maximum exposure. And in calm revenge, waiting is more powerful than action. By now, every small detail mattered. The stepson assumed freedom. My wife assumed compliance. And I assumed nothing. I had observed enough. Recorded enough. Catalogued enough. Their reckless arrogance would do the rest. I began orchestrating minor exposures. Not confrontational. Not accusatory. Simply truth revealed through circumstance. For example, I left subtle hints in shared spaces, emails left open, documents placed where they could be found. Small. Strategic. Unavoidable. One evening, I noticed the stepson had invited a few friends over. He was confident. Brash. Overestimating my absence. I quietly allowed it to proceed. Their behavior became the evidence I needed. They spoke freely about their alliance, their plans, their assumptions about my disengagement. Every sentence documented. Every gesture recorded. My wife, meanwhile, was reinforcing his confidence. She suggested ideas. Protected him from minor social missteps. Even praised his decisiveness. It was perfect. The more they reinforced each other, the closer they came to exposure. I maintained absolute calm. Even as their arrogance peaked, I spoke softly, smiled politely, acted engaged but neutral. Silence and calm are the most destabilizing forces for the guilty. Next, I introduced subtle social pressure. I invited a distant acquaintance over, someone the stepson respected socially. He assumed the meeting would validate his confidence. Instead, the acquaintance asked unexpected questions, questions that revealed his overreach and arrogance. He stumbled, flustered, trying to maintain control. I recorded everything. My wife noticed the shift. Her confidence wavered slightly. Micro-expressions betrayed guilt. Subtle hesitation in speech revealed cracks in her composure. Each day, I carefully escalated pressure through exposure. Deliberate rearrangements to challenge their assumptions. Casual conversations referencing overlooked details. Allowing their reckless moves to accumulate publicly. Each move carefully calculated to let them collapse themselves. The turning point intensified when the stepson overstepped socially. He made a bold claim in front of family friends. "I handle things now. He doesn't need to interfere." He laughed. They all nodded. Confidence at its peak. I smiled inwardly. This was the moment arrogance becomes brittle. That night, I reviewed my footage again. Every step, every word, every laugh aligned perfectly. The open doors. The overconfidence. The protective behavior from my wife. It was all there. All undeniable. I began preparing the final sequence of events. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I allowed inevitable exposure to occur naturally. Because in calm revenge, the guilty reveal themselves without interference. Over the next few days, I subtly shifted routines. Minor changes in household management. Slightly adjusting schedules. Strategic absence in expected times. Each small adjustment forced them to overcompensate. The first major crack appeared when my wife forgot an important arrangement with one of the neighborhood friends. Her arrogance had blinded her to details I had meticulously planned. I didn't point it out. I simply allowed the error to propagate. Simultaneously, the stepson began showing social strain. Misreading casual remarks. Attempting to assert dominance in public and faltering. Revealing assumptions about resources I had already secured independently. Each misstep was amplified by their belief in invulnerability. I began subtle manipulations using documents and evidence I had collected. Financial inconsistencies revealed. schedules contradicting their claims, patterns of overreach highlighted naturally, all without confrontation. The turning point required letting reality expose itself. One morning, the stepson made a miscalculation involving a minor expense. He assumed I would cover it silently. I didn't. Instead, I addressed it calmly. "That's already taken care of, as I planned." He froze, confused, uncertain. Micro-moments like this accumulate pressure faster than anger ever could. My wife noticed the shift too. She asked questions subtly, hesitated in casual decisions, began second-guessing choices she previously executed confidently. Their arrogance was collapsing from internal pressure. I maintained absolute calm. No confrontation. No accusations. Only observation and subtle guidance toward the inevitable. By now, every social, financial, and domestic misstep had been catalogued and aligned. The turning point had become unavoidable. Arrogance had peaked. Recklessness exposed patterns. Social errors revealed overreach. Their own actions had created undeniable evidence. And I was ready. The final phase of the turning point required patience. I waited for maximum exposure in a controlled environment, a family gathering I had scheduled subtly. I ensured that their arrogance would be public. Their overconfidence would be evident. Evidence would align perfectly. I remained calm and uninvolved until the moment of revelation. That calm, deliberate silence is what makes the guilty panic internally. They see nothing coming, yet they feel the pressure. And panic magnifies every previous misstep. I watched them together. My wife, protective, slightly guilty. The stepson, confident, slightly reckless. Both believing they were untouchable. I allowed it, because they were constructing their own collapse. Every laugh, every whispered conversation, every assumption of control, recorded, noted, and left to manifest naturally. The stepson overstepped in front of friends. My wife made subtle errors. Their alignment became increasingly fragile. This is the essence of quiet revenge, letting arrogance and recklessness self-destruct. Arrogance collapses fastest when it believes victory is guaranteed. The final moment of the turning point arrived quietly. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just inevitable. The family gathering I had orchestrated began. Friends, neighbors, casual acquaintances, all present. The stepson believed it was his stage. My wife believed she had aligned perfectly. And I simply existed, calm and neutral, observing. The first sign of collapse came subtly. The stepson made a joke about household management. Confidence dripped from his tone. Arrogance glinted in his expression. But this time, his audience saw it differently. They noticed the discrepancies in his claims. They noticed inconsistencies I had catalogued. They noticed his overreach. I allowed small interventions, questions from neighbors, casual comments about scheduling or responsibilities. Each one seemed innocent. But each one revealed his overconfidence, and he stumbled under scrutiny. My wife tried to cover for him. Protective smiles. Quick explanations. Slight laughter to deflect attention. But each attempt only highlighted her alignment with him. And alignment is dangerous when the foundation is unstable. I remained calm. I spoke softly when necessary. I smiled when appropriate. I didn't point fingers. I didn't raise my voice. Because calm magnifies panic in the guilty. By now, the stepson was flustered. Words stumbled. Gestures became uncertain. Micro-expressions betrayed stress. He had overestimated his control. Arrogance without awareness is self-destructive. My wife's composure faltered as well. Paused mid-sentence. Misread casual questions. Slightly defensive body language. She had been protective. Now she was exposed. I began introducing small pieces of evidence casually. A document placed subtly on the table. A photograph in plain view. A reference to a routine they had assumed invisible. Nothing dramatic. Nothing accusatory. Just truth revealed naturally. The stepson glanced at the documents, then at me. I smiled faintly. Not triumphantly. Not angrily. Just calmly. Silence carried more weight than confrontation. The cracks widened. The arrogance they had cultivated publicly became their undoing. Friends noticed inconsistencies in stories. Neighbors noticed misaligned assumptions. Social pressure amplified internal panic. At one point, the stepson tried to regain control. "I handle this," he said quickly, forcefully. I replied softly, "Yes, it seems you do." No argument. No correction. The calm emphasis of truth destabilized him. My wife realized the inevitability before he did. A subtle glance. A micro-expression of fear. Recognition that their careful alignment had failed. The final collapse occurred in silence. Confidence replaced by uncertainty. Arrogance replaced by doubt. Recklessness replaced by realization. They had believed they were untouchable. They were not. Every subtle humiliation they had enacted on me now reflected back naturally. Exposed in social context. Highlighted by accumulated evidence. Amplified by their own overconfidence. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I did not confront. Because revelation in calmness is more powerful than confrontation in anger. The stepson's overreach became visible to all. Misaligned words. Contradictions. Overconfidence evident. And in that visibility, justice was unfolding. My wife's alignment with him became clear. Protective gestures. Attempts to cover mistakes. Hesitations that had been absent for months. She realized the cost of her alliance. At the end of the evening, I did not speak of betrayal. I did not demand apology. I simply allowed truth to exist unopposed. Because when arrogance is exposed, guilt corrects itself. The turning point was complete. Betrayal had peaked. Arrogance had collapsed. Recklessness had revealed itself. Exposure was total. And I had remained calm throughout. Afterwards, I reviewed the evidence one final time. Every detail aligned perfectly. Every action documented clearly. Every pattern undeniable. The turning point was not about confrontation. It was about inevitability. The stepson's arrogance was gone. Confidence replaced by humility. Recklessness replaced by careful thought. Overreach replaced by caution. My wife's alignment shifted back. Protective gestures reduced. Micro-expressions stabilized. Hesitations became awareness. The house, which had once been dominated by subtle rebellion, now felt balanced. Not because of punishment. Not because of anger. Because truth had naturally revealed itself. The lesson became clear to me. Revenge is not about destruction. It is about strategy, patience, and letting the guilty expose themselves. By the end of this phase, I no longer felt anticipation. I felt satisfaction. Calm satisfaction. Observed inevitability. Justice earned through patience. The morning after the family gathering, the house felt different. Not tense. Not chaotic. Balanced. The weight of arrogance and recklessness had dissipated, leaving clarity in its place. My stepson moved through the home cautiously now. Where once he had acted freely, assuming control, now he hesitated. Every step measured. Every word considered. The lessons of overreach had been delivered silently, naturally, and unmistakably. I watched him adjust. Not with anger. Not with triumph. But with calm satisfaction. The most effective resolution is often invisible. My wife approached me that morning. Her expression was a mixture of realization and apology. I didn't see how far things had gone, she said softly. I didn't respond immediately. Sometimes acknowledgement is more meaningful than words. A simple nod. A measured gaze. It conveyed observation, patience, and awareness. The stepson, sensing the shift, spoke quietly. I overstepped. No defense. No arrogance. Just acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is the first step toward correction. Over the following days, small adjustments occurred naturally. Conversations included me again. Decisions were discussed openly. Shared spaces regained balance. The resolution was not forced. It emerged through the natural correction of behavior under truth and awareness. I spent time reflecting. The conflict, though emotionally taxing, had revealed human patterns. Arrogance grows when unchecked. Betrayal escalates when unchallenged. Patience exposes both without force. And I realized the value of observation over confrontation. I also observed the social effects. Neighbors noticed subtle changes. The stepson no longer dominated conversations. My wife no longer reinforced reckless behavior. Social alignment shifted to natural balance. Justice, in this sense, was complete. It required no anger, only clarity. One evening, I spoke quietly with the stepson. Authority isn't given. It's understood. Respect is earned. He listened. He nodded. And for the first time, the lesson seemed internalized. No punishment. No humiliation. Just understanding. My wife also reflected. Her gestures became more inclusive. Decisions were shared. Small apologies arose naturally. The moral of their recklessness had been revealed, and they corrected it themselves. The house felt peaceful. No dramatic confrontations. No shouting matches. Just the quiet return of balance. I began documenting the journey not as evidence, but as reflection. How patience exposed arrogance. How observation revealed betrayal. How calm ensured justice without anger. Every step of the process had a lesson. The resolution also reinforced boundaries. Trust rebuilt gradually. Communication restored carefully. Authority understood clearly. The family was not perfect, but it had learned equilibrium. I reflected often in the evenings. Silence had revealed truth. Patience had exposed recklessness. Observation had ensured accountability. No confrontation could have achieved this with the same clarity. The stepson began taking genuine responsibility. Household tasks approached seriously. Conversations measured. Decisions made thoughtfully. His growth was visible. My wife, too, adjusted naturally. Protective tendencies redirected. Alignment with recklessness diminished. Awareness of consequences strengthened. Together, they adapted. The social environment responded. Neighbors and friends noticed subtle corrections. Authority now respected. Arrogance replaced by humility. Recklessness replaced by reflection. Resolution is often as much social as it is personal. I noticed that calm justice had lasting effects. No resentment lingered. No humiliation persisted. No forced apologies were necessary. Because truth had done the work silently. At one point, my stepson asked, "Will things go back to how they were before?" I smiled quietly. No. Things will be better. Better because lessons had been learned. I also began to reflect on myself. Patience had been tested. Observation had been sharpened. Emotional restraint had been maintained. And I realized the moral of the journey. Silence and patience are sometimes the most effective form of justice. The resolution continued over weeks. Conversations were balanced. Shared spaces respected. Social engagements coordinated. Trust was restored slowly, organically, without force. The stepson's arrogance transformed into awareness. Overconfidence replaced by consideration. Recklessness replaced by responsibility. Public mistakes replaced by measured actions. He had learned the consequences of misjudgment. My wife's behavior changed as well. Protective alignment shifted. Micro-expressions of guilt replaced by calm attention. Decisions shared and discussed. Both had absorbed the lesson silently. Through all this, I maintained calm observation. No triumph. No resentment. Only clarity. Justice in resolution is rarely loud. It is quiet, natural, and morally satisfying. The house now reflected stability. Arrogance corrected. Recklessness diminished. Balance restored. Peace, finally, was achieved. And the social environment mirrored the household. Friends and neighbors noticed subtle changes. The stepson earned genuine respect. My wife regained natural authority without overreach. Resolution, after all, is as much about social equilibrium as personal correction. Justice is most lasting when it is subtle, not forced. The days following the turning point unfolded quietly but purposefully. No one needed reminders. No one needed confrontation. The household began to breathe again, free from the tension of arrogance and recklessness. My stepson approached each task cautiously now. Decisions previously made impulsively were measured. Confidence was tempered with awareness. Conversations included consideration for others. I observed without interference. His behavior was proof that patience and strategic calm are more effective than anger. My wife adapted naturally as well. Protective behavior moderated. Over-reliance on his overconfidence reduced. Small errors were now corrected quickly without panic. Balance was emerging organically. The household rules, previously assumed and unspoken, were now understood clearly. Boundaries respected. Privileges earned through behavior. Authority recognized naturally. The resolution had created a structure without force. I noticed subtle social shifts. Friends and neighbors observed small changes. The stepson no longer dominated conversations. My wife's decisions were more inclusive. Social interactions reflected calm and order. Even without explicit explanation, truth and balance had restored respect. I spoke with my stepson privately one evening. Authority isn't about dominance. It's about respect and responsibility. He nodded thoughtfully. No defensive words. No excuses. Recognition replaced arrogance. Over time, responsibilities became shared fairly. Household chores distributed evenly. Financial decisions discussed openly. Daily routines followed collaboratively. Trust, once fractured, began to mend naturally. My wife approached me with quiet acknowledgement. I see now. I understand. No lengthy apology. No justification. Just awareness. The stepson learned the cost of reckless behavior. Mistakes now carry thoughtfulness. Actions now consider consequences. Social behavior adjusted naturally. Recklessness had been corrected, not through punishment, but through clarity and observation. I reflected on the subtle moral of this resolution. Silence often teaches better than confrontation. Patience exposes arrogance more effectively than anger. Observation ensures fairness without immediate conflict. Calm, strategic resolution leaves lessons far stronger than temporary discipline. During gatherings and social events, both my wife and stepson demonstrated the changes. Friends noticed humility replacing overconfidence. Missteps were rare and corrected immediately. Conversations reflected awareness rather than entitlement. Justice had unfolded quietly but completely. Even minor incidents, once catalysts for tension, now resolved smoothly. Questions handled calmly. Miscommunications clarified promptly. Decisions shared and respected. Balance became habitual rather than imposed. I also noted my own growth. Emotional restraint strengthened. Observation became a tool for understanding rather than resentment. Patience refined my approach to justice. Resolution was not just theirs, it was mutual growth. Subtle social cues reinforced the lessons learned. Neighbors noticed cooperative behavior. Friends acknowledged maturity. Community interactions reflected respect rather than authority struggle. The moral of actions and consequences had spread naturally. The house itself seemed more peaceful. Arrogance no longer dominated spaces. Recklessness no longer disrupted routines. Authority and respect restored balance. Resolution had created harmony without conflict. The stepson began to make decisions with consideration. Household matters approached thoughtfully. Social interactions measured carefully. Confidence tempered by awareness. Mistakes became rare, and when they occurred, they were corrected promptly. My wife's behavior reflected understanding rather than fear or alliance. Micro-expressions stabilized. Decisions shared and discussed openly. Protective tendencies moderated naturally. Together, they had absorbed the moral correction. The resolution extended to social interactions beyond the household. Friends observed the change. Neighbors respected the shift in behavior. Authority restored through clarity, not control. This broader acceptance reinforced the lessons learned. I often reflected in quiet moments. Patience had proven stronger than confrontation. Observation had guided the outcome more effectively than immediate reaction. Calm, deliberate action ensures moral resolution without resentment. Justice, in this sense, had been both strategic and ethical. The household, now balanced, reflected true resolution. Arrogance corrected. Recklessness diminished. Trust rebuilt. Authority understood naturally. Peace was present not because of fear, but because of awareness. By now, even subtle conflicts resolved quickly. Questions addressed calmly. Miscommunications clarified immediately. Small disagreements handled without escalation. The lessons of turning point and rising conflict had embedded themselves deeply. I observed my stepson in a casual moment. Adjusting household chores thoughtfully. Interacting with neighbors politely. Considering consequences before acting. Arrogance replaced by awareness. Recklessness replaced by responsibility. My wife's subtle corrections reinforced the balance. Protective instincts now moderated. Decisions shared thoughtfully. Confidence restored without overreach. Together, the household had returned to equilibrium. The moral of this resolution became clear. Justice through calm observation, strategic patience, and moral clarity creates lasting change. It doesn't need confrontation. It doesn't need anger. Truth, left unopposed, corrects the guilty naturally. True justice doesn't scream, it whispers, and the guilty listen. By now, every element of the household had realigned naturally. No chaos. No conflict. No fear. Just the calm clarity that comes from lessons fully absorbed. The stepson moved through his days with measured confidence. Words chosen carefully. Decisions considered thoughtfully. Actions aligned with responsibility. Where once recklessness dominated, awareness now guided him. My wife's alignment shifted naturally as well. Protective behaviors balanced. Decisions shared openly. Micro-expressions of guilt replaced by steady awareness. Together, they reflected lessons learned without confrontation or lecture. Social interactions mirrored household corrections. Friends and neighbors noticed subtle changes. Authority now respected organically. Confidence balanced by humility. The resolution was complete because the guilty had corrected themselves, guided by truth and observation. I observed their growth quietly, without interference. Mistakes became rare. When they occurred, they were corrected immediately. Confidence now tempered by awareness. The calm, strategic patience of previous weeks had created this natural equilibrium. I began reflecting on the moral of the entire ordeal. Patience is stronger than anger. Observation teaches more effectively than confrontation. Truth, allowed to manifest without interference, corrects naturally. These lessons applied not just to them, but to my own understanding of justice and human behavior. The house itself had transformed. Arrogance no longer dominated spaces. Recklessness no longer disrupted routines. Authority now understood, respected, and balanced. Peace, finally, existed not because of force, but because of clarity and moral alignment. The stepson now approached conflicts calmly. Conversations measured. Decisions deliberate. Actions responsible. Every step reflected lessons learned. My wife's behavior also reflected full integration of these lessons. Protective tendencies redirected appropriately. Decisions considered collaboratively. Confidence restored without overreach. Balance had returned, and harmony became habitual. During a casual conversation with neighbors, the subtle shift in behavior became evident. Social respect regained. Missteps noticed but corrected quickly. Authority respected naturally. The broader social environment reinforced the household equilibrium. I reflected on the final elements of resolution. No one needed to be shamed. No anger needed to be expressed. Justice had occurred quietly, morally, and effectively. The guilty had rebuilt themselves, guided by awareness and truth. Small gestures signified lasting change. The stepson apologized casually for past overconfidence. My wife acknowledged misjudgments with calm understanding. Everyday interactions now balanced and thoughtful. These subtle corrections solidified the resolution. I noticed the long-term effects. Conversations were smoother. Household routines respected. Social interactions reflected understanding and responsibility. The equilibrium was self-sustaining. The moral clarity of the resolution extended beyond the household. Patience and observation corrected behavior more effectively than anger. Silence can expose arrogance. Strategic calm ensures that justice is lasting. The lessons, once learned, would not be forgotten. At night, I would reflect quietly. No resentment remained. No triumph needed to be displayed. The satisfaction came from clarity, balance, and moral alignment. True justice had been achieved. By now, even casual decisions showed maturity. Minor errors corrected internally. Reckless behaviors no longer repeated. Awareness guided all actions. The turning point had fully matured into lasting resolution. My wife and stepson no longer acted out of arrogance or recklessness. Protective behaviors balanced. Confidence tempered by responsibility. Respect and awareness naturally integrated. Balance was achieved without force, confrontation, or resentment. Even friends and neighbors noted subtle, lasting improvements. Authority and respect aligned. Confidence grounded in awareness. Social interactions harmonious. The resolution had extended beyond personal relationships, influencing the environment around us. I reflected one final time on the moral arc. Patience and observation expose arrogance. Calm, strategic justice corrects the guilty naturally. Truth, left unopposed, ensures lasting moral and social correction. Resolution had not been about punishment. It had been about guidance through clarity. The household was now a place of equilibrium. Arrogance corrected. Recklessness diminished. Trust rebuilt. Authority understood and respected. Peace existed, earned through strategic calm rather than confrontation. The stepson's confidence grew responsibly. Social interactions balanced. Household responsibilities handled thoughtfully. Lessons internalized, preventing future overreach. My wife, too, acted with balanced awareness. Together, they reflected the moral of the journey. Mistakes are corrected through observation and clarity. Arrogance fades under the weight of truth. Patience and calm are more powerful than confrontation. The resolution was complete, internally and externally. After the resolution had settled, the house no longer held tension. No awkward glances. No defensive words. No pretense. Only a quiet understanding. I spent the mornings observing small moments. The stepson now acted deliberately, considering consequences before moving. Words measured. Decisions shared. Actions thoughtful. It was not obedience. It was growth. My wife, too, had transformed naturally. Protective instincts redirected appropriately. Confidence restored without overreach. Awareness embedded in daily routines. Together, they had learned lessons without confrontation. I reflected on the journey often, noticing subtle truths about human behavior. Patience exposes arrogance. Observation uncovers betrayal. Calm ensures justice without hostility. These lessons, once internalized, became daily guides. One evening, I sat quietly in the living room. The stepson approached, calm but tentative. I understand now, he said softly. No arrogance. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. I smiled faintly, simply nodding. Recognition suffices. No triumph needed. Silence can convey more than words. My wife, observing from nearby, joined the conversation. I see the truth in it, she said quietly. We didn't argue. We didn't dramatize. We simply allowed clarity and understanding to settle naturally. The evenings became reflective moments. Conversations calm. Decisions discussed. Responsibilities shared. Balance existed because it had been earned through awareness, not forced through punishment. I noticed small signs of enduring change. The stepson corrected himself before errors escalated. My wife acted with thoughtfulness rather than assumption. Household harmony reflected lessons learned. Resolution had become stability. During casual social visits, the stepson now interacted respectfully. Friends noticed humility. Social missteps were corrected immediately. Confidence balanced by awareness. The moral correction had reached beyond the household. I reflected quietly on the arc of events. Betrayal had escalated to arrogance. Arrogance had blinded them to truth. Calm observation had revealed the consequences naturally. Justice had occurred without confrontation. Lessons had been internalized. The turning point, resolution, and now ending were all part of the same strategy. Patience. Observation. Strategic calm. Every step ensured clarity, understanding, and moral correction. I spent time mentoring the stepson subtly, guiding without lecturing, teaching responsibility without anger, allowing him to understand consequences personally. By not forcing lessons, I ensured they would be internalized deeply. My wife also reflected on her choices. Protective behavior moderated. Misaligned alliances corrected. Awareness strengthened. Together, they demonstrated understanding without needing external pressure. I realized that true endings are not dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. No displays of power. They are calm, reflective, and morally satisfying. Even minor disagreements were now opportunities for learning. Issues addressed calmly. Mistakes corrected naturally. Communication clear and deliberate. The household had evolved into a self-regulating system. The stepson began taking initiative responsibly. Household management handled thoughtfully. Social interactions measured. Decisions considered carefully. Recklessness no longer had a foothold. My wife acted with balance. Protective gestures guided by awareness. Confidence expressed without domination. Household harmony maintained. Balance was no longer fragile. It was habitual. The broader social environment mirrored the lessons learned. Neighbors observed confidence tempered by humility. Friends noticed accountability in decisions. Social respect restored naturally. Justice had extended beyond personal correction. I reflected often in quiet moments. Patience is stronger than anger. Observation is more instructive than confrontation. Silence can communicate lessons more effectively than words. The journey from betrayal to resolution had taught profound truths. I observed my stepson interacting with friends. Subtle acknowledgement of lessons learned. Thoughtfulness replacing impulsiveness. Humility guiding confidence. The arc of growth was complete in his behavior. My wife's demeanor reflected awareness. Protective instincts balanced. Decisions shared and discussed openly. Confidence grounded in understanding. Together, they embodied lessons learned naturally. Even routine moments reflected change. Household chores approached responsibly. Conversations handled thoughtfully. Minor disagreements addressed calmly. The home was no longer a battleground, but a space of reflection and balance. I reflected on the moral clarity of the entire experience. Patience, observation, and calm are more powerful than anger. Betrayal, arrogance, and recklessness can be corrected without confrontation. Justice, when delivered through strategic calm, endures.